The blue screen, you mean?
Oh, no, the
Yeah.
There he is. Hello. We're live as far as I know. Hi. So I'm David Blumenstein. I'm the Deputy President of the Australian Cartoonists Association. And this is a talk which I called Drawing Work, Opportunities for Cartoonists, Illustrators and Comics Makers. And then I think there was a subtitle which was Avoiding Poverty, ? Standing up for yourself and others. And so this is an Australian Cartoonists Association talk, and we're running it because we could not do our conference this year. Normally we would have the Stanley's conference happening at this time, and it would have been in Coffs Harbour. After this, actually at 6:30, Cathy Wilcox and some of the other people on the committee are going to be live streaming to the same place here. If you're watching on Facebook, stay on Facebook, because at 6:30 they will be live streaming the awards. So we'll see who actually gets the awards. This is going also to Twitch via the Squishface Studio Twitch stream, which I'm David, as well as being that deputy president guy. I'm also one of the people who started Squishface Studio in Melbourne. And that's all you need to know about me for now, I think. I'll just say that I'm on the lands of the Bunurong people right about now, and very often in the last couple of years. And I like doing an acknowledgement of country like this, particularly when we're having talks about cartooning, because I think when you're talking about graphic storytelling, you're talking about the original graphic storytellers to a large degree. So I like to do that acknowledgement that they're the traditional custodians of the country that we're on, and that I'm on. We're actually got some different people. I think we might have some Gadigal people possibly. And anyway, I recognise their continuing connection to the land and pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and extend that respect to anyone First Nations watching today. So this is a chat about a few things, but all around drawing, freelancing stuff. And so what I'll do is I'll just let the people who we've invited in here introduce themselves, and then we'll just jump straight into it. So who dares to do so first?
Silence.
I can. I'm Cassie Derrick. I'm on Gadigal and Bidjigal land, and want to pay my respects to the elders and ancestors of this land. I'm the Deputy Director of the Media section of the MEAA, the Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance, which is the union for all creative workers. And in my section, in the media section, we represent cartoonists and journalists and other writers, etc.
Cool. Awesome. Hi. Sorry, I was writing stuff down. I'm Gabriel Clark. I'm saying hello from Dharawal country, south of Sydney, North Wollongong. Dharawal country is really held me during the pandemic. It's been a place of like a lot of kind of problem solving, and it's really done a lot of healing for me out here where I live. So I really want to pay my respects to the custodians of this place, the traditional owners of this land, the Wodi people, and I want to acknowledge that elders, past and present, and any Indigenous people watching this today, and say thanks for looking out for the country for us. I'm a lecturer at UTS, where I have a research area in comics. I'm a comics scholar and comics researcher. I'm also, a producer. One of those evil people who use work around sort of cartooning and multimodal storytelling. And I've worked on a few projects for the Sydney Opera House, producing a festival called Graphic Festival, and a few other storytelling events. One of my key storytelling events is a project called Read to Me, which is live comics storytelling. So that's sort of something. So I've got a research interest in comics. I've got a sort of a practice around producing and working in that community in comics and cartooning, and my comics comics research sort of area. In that, we've worked recently with the Australia Council for the Arts publishing and creating a report on the state of sort of the graphic storytellers. And then, so we've got a project that was launched last year. I think the Graphic Storytellers report was published, and it's a 60-page sort of government report which looks at the industry and the working lives of cartoonists and graphic storytellers. And we've also another project which we can talk about later, which is a big comic sort of research history kind of project called Folio, which is more of a design history rather than looking at the working lives of that industry. That's kind of a pretty bad summary of me. There you go.
You're not an evil producer in any way. You get all of my props for graphic. That was so great. And frankly, if you had been producing this interview, we wouldn't be having my camera on itself. Expect that to happen some more.
And yeah, expect mine to fog up as well. So yeah, it's good.
Hi, my name is Dean Rankine, and I'm on Bullwarren land of the Kulin Nation down in Lewarren, south of Melbourne. I'm a freelance comic book artist, writer, sort of illustrator. I've worked on Simpsons Comics, Futurama, Rick and Morty, Invader Zim. I did a short thing on Hellboy. I've did a graphic novel for Riverdale Diaries starring Veronica for Archie Comics. What else? Australian Mad Magazine, The Beano, The Dandy, Underdog, Oggy and the Cockroaches, and I've been illustrating the Timmy the Ticked Off Pony books written by Magda Szubanski.
Ah.
Yep.
That's an impressive list.
Yes, it's a very
Just a couple of things.
Yeah. So you're qualified to talk about freelancing as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to depress everybody very soon.
Let's start with Gabe then. Because it's the most visual thing that we've got today, and I know you got slides ready. I think it'd be good to talk about this report. Because, look, I want to talk about this report because I see myself entirely in it, and it completely validates all of my choices in the last 10 years. That's my selfish reason for wanting to talk to you about it. But can you give people a little bit of a brief introduction to it if they haven't read it yet?
I will. I'll share my screen, and then I can show you the desktop I have ready. So these handsome people I'm showing you are the team that who the first panelists, of course, handsome white people who made the report. Elizabeth, Pat Grant, myself, and Ronnie Scott are the comic scholars on the report, and we were asked, and Pat actually initiated the conversation with the Australia Council for the Arts to talk about creating a report on the working lives of graphic storytellers in Australia. So it's called Graphic Storytellers at Work, and it is based on survey data. So we put a survey call out for qualitative and quantitative data, and we got about 260 respondents. And from those respondents, we created a report which looks at different sort of factors. And the reason why we kind of did it is because myself, working as a producer, knowing the community of cartoonists and comics people in Australia, we were seeing this sort of trend where we noticed that industry, and I'm also a design lecturer, a design teacher. So I teach and educate in design education and service design and things like that. And we were noticing that these skills, which we know as through comics, cartooning, zine fairs, were actually being utilized in really expensive ways by industry. And so, but there's no real kind of acknowledgement that the comics and those skills are actually being used. And so we were talking about how did we see this thing happening? Where does it come from? And how are those needs kind of being recognized and utilized by these industries? So the report itself is a government report, 60 pages of data, really heavily written by Pat Grant, He was the lead on the whole project. He also drew the whole project. I was kind of his sidekick, helping him get over the line with stuff. And Ronnie and Liz were sort of their overseers and editors and stuff. But a majority of the work, I've got to really acknowledge Pat Grant for pretty much this whole project. So we did 2 versions of it. What was unique about it is we did the traditional report, and then we also made because we're like comics, we made a double-sided A1 fold-out poster zine, which talks about the report. And so this is photos of the zine that we made. I've got an email later on. If anyone's watching and they want a copy of this, they should just email me at that email address and I can post them out to you. I've got still got a box. We've printed about 2,000 of them. We've distributed them around Australia. We've put them in libraries. We've put them in schools. We've put them in places in the hope that the teenager who is an anime nerd, was a manga nerd in high school, finds this thing, pins it up at their wall, and that you can see how their skills are utilized outside their kind of narrow sphere of what they understand their skill set to be. So some of the key sort of things that we found and we looked at were how technical skills were being applied. And so all of these kind of came across in sort of a DIY kind of space. Most of the skills that were learnt tend to be through practice, not necessarily through education. Communities of practice like zine fairs, like comic conventions, all those sorts of areas which are self-organized and self-funded. That's where a majority of the people are getting their skills. It's in the doing and in the community of practice and what we're calling the creative ecology of Australian comics that these sort of skills are being developed. We looked at them as far as technical skills go, but also, interestingly, it's like interpretive skills. So there's the skills of making, drawing, printing, understanding pre-press, understanding publishing for web, all those sort of variables. But then there's also the skills of interpreting. How do you tell a story? How do you translate an idea? How do you do how do you listen? Cartoonists are actually inherently good listeners, and they're also really good kind of interpreters because they can listen and then they can translate that onto the page. So we identified these sort of areas that the interpretive skills come down to as working with complexity, often where you'll find cartoonists in spaces like graphic recording or like service design, really kind of understanding, looking at really complex systems and actually being able to then turn that into a kind of more succinct kind of ideas or succinct narratives. We did case studies in the report, and anecdotally we would hear the guy who had the superpower, the magic power, could come into a room and draw like the CEO's idea and those sorts of ideas. They were actually highly valued because of that skill. And it's almost like in a traditional advertising sense where you see the art director talking to the illustrator or those sorts of storyboard artists. But here you're seeing it in different spaces. Cartoonists work really well with visual metaphor. Comics is a language of nested visual metaphors, and cartoonists do that really well. And that's another way that sort of complex ideas are really succinctly communicated. One of the other things that we noticed, areas that cartoonists and these skills being used for, is in in service design, where people are looking at futuring kind of ideas or planning. Often there's these things called journey maps, which are used quite heavily. And the idea of an experience, what someone uses experiences through a space, but then what happens when you change that. And a way to articulate that futuring is through comics, and is through comics and storytelling. And other areas that we saw really used a lot is in education, using sort of comics. And I think that's really evident if you look at like the history of who was the publishing company that Condom Man? Do you remember that? Streetwise Graphics, I think it was.
Streetwise,
Yeah, and so if you look at the history of sort of comics education there's always using comics for education, but it's also having more broadly in other areas now, looking at different kind of communities and different areas of practice. Health and medicine, we saw the same sort of things being used, and also talked about what their skills were around sort of having empathy, basically being able to listen and and to observe and to communicate stories there. We did 4 case studies. We have a case study for an organization with Sam Woolman, who's working for the unions and his union work. We did another case study on graphic law and the communications there, which is actually using comics in really innovative ways for contracts. So when you see legal contracts that are full of legalese, what are ways that you can simplify that for your audience in case your audience may have issues with reading and language. So comics are actually being used by sort of some parts of the industry as contracts. And you can also see comics now, like I think there were famous banks that were very excited that their terms and conditions were now illustrated and cartooned because the communication of these really complex things became something which is so much more digestible for an audience. Like I mentioned before, service design, but also graphic medicine as well as an emerging place where talking to communities about how to look after yourself with health issues, and also talking to the practitioners of those health issues about how to talk to your community. So often doctors can not have a very good bedside manner, so maybe they could read a few comics about their conditions to understand what their users are doing and what is happening. No, I just called a patient a user. Anyway, it's not a good term, but yeah. And so that's kind of an overview of the report there. I've got also, we'll talk back to this as we're talking, but I've also got the actual report here as a PDF, which you can all download all of this from the Australia Council for the Arts. So you'll, if anyone wants a copy, go to the Australia Council for the Arts and just look for Graphic Storytellers at Work. And you can download a PDF of this report. You can download a web version of the comic poster. And also, like I said, I'll post up the email later. And if people want a copy of the actual print copy of the report, just pop your name and postal address to this email address, and I'll throw one in the mail for you.
I'm putting in the chat because people are already asking for it.
Cool.
Nice. So this survey, I mean, I was talking to some of you when you were just sort of kicking it off, but I don't remember what the outcomes were that you've just explained being the original focus of the survey and research. Am I wrong? Was this always the idea of what they wanted to get out of it? What did they come to you wanting?
Well, it was kind of like we talked to them about what we'd noticed, and that and I think Australia Council had recognised they had no real kind of data on this community, their arts community. We're actually talking about our ARC linkage project, but that project was that's separate to this. We were actually combining them both at the same time, but then it was really quickly realized through one meeting that no, we should do a separate project. And so looking at the survey data that we sent out, which was about financial, which was about earning, which was about those sorts of things, but it also had lots of kind of quantitative questions, open-ended sort of written questions about crazy kind of things where people's skills are being used. Someone was talking about they were at a conference and they were drawing brains on bald heads to sort of help visualize ideas about, medicine. So the cartooning skills are being used in these kind of really unique and diverse ways. The report itself, the executive summary is probably a good place to start. The key findings are here on this one. I'll go full screen just so that display mode, where are we? Full screen. There we go. So we're looking at how cross-industry settings, graphic storyteller skills are likely to be valued for interpersonal and interpretive skills, which we've talked about before. So we noticed that through the data that there was an increasing demand for these skills. So people of the graphic storytellers surveys, 41% think demand for their skills is increasing, which is actually quite high. We noticed that the point about them being educators 28% of the participants describe their skills becoming useful in an educational setting. So that's really quite common, where people are having to draw and talk and communicate education content. Health and safety and well-being data we found from that. They use visual language, which talked about synthesized complex messages. One thing we found was that we're attracting a younger and more gender diverse set of practitioners, especially in the younger age bracket of comics and cartoonists communities. Is the people who filled in our survey. In the top end, at the older end, were kind of white males, and then down the bottom, we're seeing a lot more women and people of color and gender diversity. Almost all artists. Sorry
to interrupt. What do you think's behind that?
I look at it for that. To answer that question, I probably look at it from an educational point of view as a lecturer, where a majority of my students are female and people of color now at my faculty at uni. And so I see in industry, people in illustration and in design, graphic design more general, it's as a teacher, majority of my students are female. I don't know if that's actually reflected in industry. You know, it's always kind of weighted towards white men. But I do definitely experience that. So I see that the graduates that are coming out are probably more inclined to be female and more diverse as well. Yeah.
I found it's up there now, I think. There's a round who thinks that there's more demand for their skills, but there's also a 13% of artists surveyed who think demand for their skills is decreasing. And I was wondering if you managed to get into the data deeply enough to figure out what those people are doing. Because I'm wondering, are they, is it like all the rest is like, oh yes, you know, there just happen to be, you know, people who feel like, you know, it's going down. Or are they people who are in some of those media kind of jobs potentially who are seeing things dry up a little bit?
I'd assume the latter's correct from that. I don't think we had much data about people talking about their roles as a straight up cartoonist, say for a media company. That seemed to be not really clear in our data. I would assume that the people who are not finding any increasing demand for the skills are probably the ones who aren't working in these sort of freelance capacities in using these skill sets. Maybe they're good, but that's a bit of an assumption on my part. I'm trying to recall the data, or if there's anything in the PDF that I can flick to, but I'll keep chewing over that bit. See if we can come back to it.
Dean, you read this report, I think. What kind of jumped out at you when you...
I did, but I don't remember it. I'm so sorry. I think as a practitioner was, I do recall feeling like, look, no one's really busted my door down for my creative empathy, or those kind of tools. It's just that hasn't happened. Like, isn't. I'm not dismissing it. Please don't. But some of the terminology is like, and I don't think I would be, the percentage like, more people are after me because of these skills. I believe that is absolutely a skill base for sort of graphic storytellers, but that hasn't necessarily translated in what I do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and I think that idea of empathy work, because that comes up in there.
I think that's a way it's kind of looking at how, I think it's us trying to articulate what a skill is. And so the idea that it's empathy work where you can empathize with the person who's talking at you in order to put that on paper, basically. And so you can turn that into story. You can turn that into sort of cartooning. You can turn that. So that skill of translation involves empathy. And I feel like that's really clear when you're looking at people who are in, I guess, graphic recording or in those sort of service design industries where you are looking at an audience and you're trying to articulate what they're doing and putting that there. It may be different for people who are maybe working on a graphic novel or a long form book or something like that, because those skills seem a little different. However, in the field of creative writing, because also comics is writing, right? It requires empathy to understand character and understand place and things like that. So how we're articulating that sort of skill is in and around what sort of comics and trying to kind of show the graphic storyteller's skill set. And so in different areas, and not just in the practical places of I can draw, I can do this and I can do that, but there's this other area which I think in design industries in particular, really you can use those skills.
I think so, but then I'm in doing that work in those industries. I want to jump to Cassie, but before I do, I just want to, because in one of those pages you had up there before, at the very beginning, there's a big thing right there up front sort of saying that the intention of this is not to provide a full representation of all Australians practicing graphic storytelling. I'm wondering what sort of response you were anticipating in putting that right at the top. This is not about everyone.
Well, it's kind of hard because these skills are actually really diverse. We understand that it's also used in storyboarding and animation and in those sorts of places. So how do we actually look at comics and cartooning away from these other places and see where these skills are being used? Because in animation and in those industries and those media industries, those skills are used a lot, and that's really clear, right? Whereas I think when we're talking about who we kind of think that we're approaching when we put the call out, that's kind of we were hitting up illustrators, cartoonists, graphic recorders, all those sorts of communities of practice. We were kind of staying clear from those other sort of spaces, because we were hoping that we, in our kind of view of and our experience of the world and our experience of that industry and communities, it was trying to hit up those communities where we knew they were, and not within those industries, which I think are already sort of heavily kind of covered with this information.
Well, let me ask Cassie then, do you know of, or has MEAA done much research into how freelancers in media and entertainment are making a living?
We haven't done a lot in terms of exactly how, what kind of work people are doing, but there does certainly in media, we ran a really big survey of freelancers last year, and there's certainly some people who are, I should actually try and pull this up and remember the actual stats. There are some people who are sort of freelancing full time, and there's a big portion of people who are doing their creative practice, but also have a job on the side, basically.
And then we found the same sort of information. A majority of people seem to have a job on the side, or we call it a side hustle. So, you'd have a creative side hustle, which might be your cartoon and comics practice, and then you'd also have the job which pays your bills and things like that. So it really depends on we sort of found the same sort of thing in our survey.
A couple of those stats from that report that jumped out at me the first time I read it was, I think, like you just said, half the artists surveyed were working day jobs, but also half the artists surveyed were living below the Australian median income.
Yeah, so we had like 1 in 3 live in poverty, 1 in 2 live below the median income, and 1 in 8 make more than 100K per year. And that's kind of one of the things that we found.
I'd love to know who that person is. Who is that? Really? Sorry, Cassie, you got to say something.
I've just found our report from our survey. So maybe I'll share my screen actually. So we can have a look at this.
You could also, if you can share the link with me in our private chat, I can throw it into the public.
Yeah,
one.
absolutely. I can do that. If I share my screen.
I'm just going to put up a comment that I've seen that someone listening has put up. It's Tim McEwen. He says he found the report really interesting, but it seemed not to talk to him as a comic maker. These things, these other industries that are using comics people, they're different jobs that share different skills. There's overlap, but they're not the same in the same way. I'm not an animator. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, I think that we were trying to find where, I mean, I would also say that the skills that Tim has are the skills we're talking about as well. So, because of how, but is it about application of those skills? That's the kind of the nuance that we're kind of discussing here, and that to me seems like where skills are. It's kind of understanding how your skills can be applied in different places, I think. And what I've noticed in practitioners that I know is them looking at their skills in one place and their ability to then go into, say, other industries and use those skills. So we were talking about an ex-Sydney Morning Herald cartoonist who was then working for institutes, sort of public policy institutes, doing cartooning for those sorts of communities. So that idea of diversifying, I think you mentioned before, Dean, was it? It's kind of a horrible word. Yeah, how do we get those other people to look at this thing over here and say, oh, I can use that over there.
Yeah.
Tim,
And
to this comment. Sorry, I feel like I'm interrupting everyone.
It's all good. Keep going. Tim's allowed to interrupt.
Because I get what's coming out of this is this idea that here's a report to tell you that you're trying to be in the media and entertainment industries is a silly idea, like someone's parent or career advisor almost. I didn't read that, but what do you say about it?
I think it actually shows that I think people's that industries are, or at least arts and the other industries that I look at, like the communities of practice and the creative ecology, are like criminally underfunded and undersupported
and undervalued.
And that's what I leave with, and that's kind of what I was always yelling at Australia Council researchers about was funding. Like we look at the funding opportunities for these artists and storytellers, they're up against the same sort of funding opportunities as prose writers, and because there's a larger kind of cultural kind of appreciation for those or awareness of those sort of practices, they seem to get a lot of the money. But what we know from this data is that these skills are really highly prized, and that these communities of practice are where these skills are developed. So therefore, funding should be thrown at these communities of practice as well as individuals and projects, but definitely like your zine fairs and your arts nights and those sorts of things are actually really important.
I think that's a good time to go back to Cassie and ask about maybe the journey that MEAA has taken over the last few years, and particularly around that freelance committee.
Yeah, absolutely. I think obviously with our section, the majority of our members are journalists, and the huge digital disruption and shift that's happened in the journalism industry over the last decade has seen a lot of our members lose their jobs, and a lot of redundancies at most major media outlets, and move into freelancing and the industry to rely on a freelancing model, and that's seen across all sorts of workforces. There's a lot of what our members are telling us is there's a lot of great things about being a freelancer, and some of them never ever want to go back to having a job, but the challenge we faced was that we in this country, we've got people who are employees have a safety net, of a minimum wage and working conditions, and freelancers don't. Freelancers have none of that, and so we're having extremely important work done by extremely dedicated and skilled people who are earning nothing, who are just barely able to earn a living wage. And I'll just share my screen again, I think. So the challenge that we faced as a union was that we were for quite a while, as more and more of our members were becoming freelancers and crying out for some support to be able to do this incredibly important work and earn a living wage. For quite a while, we were at a bit of a loss about what to do, particularly when you've got very, very anti-worker governments that aren't going to change laws to recognise different types of workers. And I think for a while we were crossing our fingers and hoping for a more worker-friendly government to be elected so that we could then change laws. And once it became pretty clear that that's not something we should wait for, we've started doing work. I'm the lead of the freelance campaign. We've started doing work to get a real understanding from members about what the core challenges people are facing are, and something that I wonder. I'm just showing here. Most people who were surveyed in our survey were incredibly experienced, but were earning less than half the average Australian wage for really, really important work. So we've been sort of speaking to members to try and understand, what those really core issues are. The biggest one by far is rates, and I think it speaks to what we were talking about before, how it's interesting how that report shows that the older people in the industry are white men and the younger people are more diverse. And what we're hearing is that, and you need diversity for storytellers, you absolutely need diversity, and what we're sort of hearing from people is that because of gender pay gaps and racial pay gaps and things like that in this country, because of those challenges, diverse people and working class people frankly can't afford to do it. They can't afford to freelance in creative practice. They don't have the luxury, and we're all worse off for it. So I wonder if that's also what you're finding is maybe people dropping out of the practice over time.
I've got something about that. I'll try and find it in the report.
I remember, this is off the top of my head, but you had a nice little graph.
Yeah.
Which was people, the way I read it was, here's all the young people getting into graphic storytelling, comics, cartooning because it's fun and cool. And here they are hitting extreme burnout and falling out of it. And then at about the 20-year mark, there being a bump up, suggesting, I guess, like if you could stick at it for 20 years, you're probably not going to go anywhere else.
Yeah, I've something. Yeah, let me try and find it.
So basically, I've been too dumb to change.
That's one of those helpful attitudes. Is the dumb? Yeah, that's right. If you can hang on to that, your immaturity and stupidity, then you can stick in this thing for quite a while.
So sort of finding out from members, what the biggest issues are. The biggest one is rates, but there are other concerns as well. Superannuation is a massive one for people, but just not having a safety net for retirement, and having to constantly chase payment, not getting kill fees if work is terminated by a publisher. And so what our committee, which is made up of freelancers, has done is they've created a charter of rights, of the kind of core rights that would be minimum standards for freelancers that we're now our members are in the process of endorsing. We had a massive meeting earlier in the week. We had 130 freelancers come on and discuss it and endorse it. And so we're now in the process of approaching major media outlets, starting with the major ones, but the plan is to make this sort of workforce wide, to and organising the freelancers that contribute to them in all the different types of format. You know, we've got podcasters, we've got cartoonists, we've got writers, we've got sub-editors, etc. To pressure those outlets to agree to it and sign on to it, essentially.
I found the point about practice retention. Do you want me to? I'll just quickly share the screen again. Share screen. Is it working yet?
Yep.
There we go. Yeah, practice retention. So here it's saying that sort of we had 80 respondents say they've been practicing for 6 to 10 years, but then after that sort of period, it sort of clearly goes down. But at the end here, we had sort of over 50 or 55 respondents say they've been practicing for more than 25 years. So 25 or more. And that sort of shows that there's a kind of like like you're explaining, David, there's like this peak of kind of interest, and then there's the realities of how to actually how do you actually want to engage in this industry in a really practical way, and if it's a full-time gig or a part-time gig. So I feel like there probably is quite a bit of a drop-off there as far as sort of retaining your practice goes.
Well, that makes me think of my animation colleagues, because I've done animation for a long time, but I sort of stopped being in the industry, as in working in studios doing that work. If I think about it, like probably 6 to 10 years after I started, and I think that's pretty common that you'd get rooms full of quite young people, and people get a little bit sick of the pay or conditions or overtime, or getting to crunch and being expected to work on weekends and things like that, and they just get jack of it, and you replace them with some graduates, which is, I'm sure, very similar to lots of other industries. But
and was that as a freelancer as well, or was that
not necessarily, but it might be. It depends.
Okay.
You have really good kind shops, and you have some mercenary places as well, and so you might get super, maybe you wouldn't, but depends on the length of the production. I suppose it's different between TV and then ads or something like that. Dean, are these all your challenges, the ones that we're talking about?
Yes, I just think that my challenges are kind of the same as everybody else's. It's how do I survive? How do I keep doing this kind of work? And and sometimes it goes, it's easy, and I'm doing well, and other times I get nothing. I've had no work for 3 months now, and that's pretty standard. That happens,
This is someone's comment. I can't see whose it is, unfortunately. Sorry, but pretty common.
Yeah, kind of standard.
Yeah, that's pretty. Yeah, one thing I did notice when I was reading the report yesterday was that people who basically, as far as profits go and making money, whether or not they're making lots of money, tend to make more money just from self-publishing and the profits they get off that versus actually having a book deal and stuff. Because if they've self-published a bunch of zines, they can actually get all the costs back and all the sort of overheads and all that sort of stuff and charge for that. Obviously, it's a case-by-case basis, but as far as percentages go, say someone who's working with a graphic novel deal versus I've been selling comics at zines, at zine fairs, it tends to be, it looks like the amount of money that the percentage of money they get back is more from people who are kind of self-publishing and selling, rather than working in those kind of traditional industries and using those traditional industries. Even though it looks good, it's like, how good is it as far as the money you get from the publisher and those sorts of questions.
Yeah, I think you can get royalties. I've got, like, when I've done books, I get royalties, and that's
Excellent.
something that's really nice, as opposed to just trying to self-publish it. I think with comics as well, I think it sort of needs to be acknowledged that there's it's like the film industry in some ways, that there's like a lot of independent people who are doing comics, as well as people doing much more commercial kind of style of things, that you can't necessarily put all comic book creators into the one boat kind of thing. And I think there's lots of people, and probably like the majority of comics created in this country by independent artists who are making their own thing and paying their way, while there's a handful of artists and writers who are like working for overseas companies, and maybe doing more commercial kind of style work.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely reflected in as far as the industry goes, comics industry in Australia. I mean, they're really kind of, it's pretty small, slim pickings. And looking at overseas markets and seeing how, say, Australian comics people have actually had a bit of success with a book overseas or things like that, or at least being picked up by companies like Top Shelf, you'll see that there is kind of interest from overseas markets in Australian stories, but it doesn't seem to me to be reflected by Australian publishers. It's more like companies like Top Shelf understanding that there are these creators who are making something and will publish their work, but these creators can't get Australian publishers to publish their work, which is I always find quite bizarre.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's very few Australian comic book specific publishers, and it's more a kind of a they're hoping to get a grant or something per comic, there's probably more chance of like working for book publishers, but in like doing a graphic novel in some ways, I think there's probably a nice avenue for people to try to look at as well.
Yeah,
and you are seeing some of those bubbling up from major publishers here in Australia. But it's also a little disturbing when you hear, accounts of how many books is a successful book in Australia, how many sales, because there would be people, like you were talking about, people who are making reasonably good money selling books at fairs and going to conventions and things like that. If a successful book is only a couple thousand copies, and that's like a proper publisher, then you know what, I could probably put in a lot of work and do this independently as well.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I think and whereas those sorts of figures and numbers are probably easier to sell in an American market, even as an independent. If you could sell it independently here, and then find someone to distribute it in America or publish it over there for you, that might be a way to do it.
We're a little bit hobbled not having the 8 or 10 big shows that Americans can, if they want to travel across the country every year, they can do all the shows and make a bit of a living that way. We don't really have that, although Dean's been a guest at the shows that we do have. So do they kick up interest in your books when you go and do those shows?
Yeah, absolutely. I think because I'm a guest, so I don't pay for the table, which I think is like. So I think that it's a bit of a mug's game sometimes. We've got to offload $350 for a table and then sell your comics on top. It's a lot of comics to have to sell. That's definitely a way that you can make money. Hey, can I do my list, David? Can I go to my list now? Is it okay?
Dean wrote some things down on a bit of paper.
So I wrote a list, right? And my theory with this list is that very few people make money by just doing comics. Okay, I can think of 3 people who can make a full-time living drawing comics in Australia for American publishers. I can think of 1 writer who's doing really well, Tom Taylor, and I can think of 2 artists who are working for European comics. That's it. Nobody else is surviving in Australia purely on making comics. Okay, so my theory is, someone's putting like Thomas Campy. Yes, thank you. So my theory is that everybody else, that we kind of need to do a splattering of everything to try to survive. Okay, so I made this list. Okay, so if anyone has any ideas about what I should be adding to the list, this list, but here's. So my theory is you have to choose maybe 4 or 5 of these things to survive as a cartoonist in Australia. Okay, I'm not being facetious with this first one. Is having a partner who works. If you have a partner who works, if you're coming, we're talking about that. It's kind of that you come from a privileged position. You know, you kind of like, if you're freelancing, we're talking about sort of like people of color, women. You just can't. You know, if you've got kids, you just can't afford to do it. So having a partner who works, have a part-time job that you don't hate. Please interrupt at any stage if you feel this is teach cartooning, become an academic, run right, live caricaturing from photographs, illustrate books, illustrate magazines if there's a magazine still exists, you know that kind of thing occasionally. Editorial cartoons, but I wouldn't go into editorial cartoons just by themselves at this stage. Put strip cartoons on the web and then sell merch like Sarah Scribbles and that kind of thing. The more angst-ridden, the better, apparently. Seems to work really well. Draw for American and European and Japanese markets. And book publishers, I think that book publishers seem a lot more open to graphic novels. Get arts funding, draw commissions, crowdfund projects, and hopefully get a little bit of cream on top of that. Does I draw commissions, do graphic facilitation, character design for animation, character design for storyboarding for animation, animation kind of if you're doing drawn animation, storyboarding for film, game design, get a manager and do commercial art. Those are the things I'm thinking, and so you have to just choose 4 or 5 and you'll be all right. But so but that's kind of the gig. There's the gig economy. Like, you know, this is how we kind of have to survive, and there are options that we may not necessarily have thought about, but we just can't have a narrow view and go, oh yeah, I'm going to be a comic book artist. Because if you want to be a comic book artist, that's great, but you're going to have to need to get a job as well to pay the bills, because it just doesn't pay like that. So that's my big list.
I've got a little graph on day jobs and side hustles.
Yeah.
Which sort of talks to that. 1 second, let it. So looking here, this is Pat's. God, Pat's good. Awesome drawings and yeah. So day jobs aside, the life of graphic story is often a balancing act between personal projects, freelance work, day jobs, and side hustles. So about 50% of the graphic storytellers surveyed supported themselves with work that is non-creative. So we looked at ideas of like what types of work you do to help support yourself and how you use your time. Those in the highest and lowest income brackets are slightly less likely to have a day job than those in the middle income brackets. In other words, the decision to take on a day job is not necessarily a decision to move up or down between different income brackets. We also asked graphic storytellers how much of their time was spent on creative work. The responses demonstrated a relatively even spread from 5 hours a week to more than 50, with an overall average of 34 hours per week. So that's how much people are averagely spending on their creative work. And looking at the graph here, we've got the income brackets, the number of artists, and the day job or no day job grouped by income brackets. So day job is, the purple, and no day job is the orange. So how does a day job influence the way artists use their creative time? So it's thinking about how do you kind of think about your creative time in the context of your day job. So percentage of creative time spent on personal work. So you might have the graphic novel, or the thing that isn't actually paying the bills yet, but you want to get it done. And so looking at the percentage of time, people spend 20 to 30 ranges, but you're seeing here that people in sort of spending 100% of their time on a day job. So we're looking at 40% of the time on a day job, and then down here you can see that they're spending 90% on their creative projects.
So am I reading it right? So if you have a day job, you're spending more time on average on your own projects?
I think that's what they're saying. Percentage of time, creative time spent on personal work is 100%, day job and no day job. Yeah, so someone's got a day job and they spend 100% of their time. So what they're saying is that those people, they're making money 100% from their personal work, their creative practice.
Okay. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So their day job is actually the thing that then is the comics making or the cartooning or whatever they're calling it. Yeah. So it's an interesting sort of thing to see that people do have these day jobs and side hustles, and it sort of makes your point, Dean, sort of ring true your list.
Another graph that I was happy to see, because I did a survey for the ACA the year before, and it looked exactly the same as my graph, so I felt like I must have done it right. And it was about how much of your income do you make from your creative work, and it was this, am I looking at the camera? It was this sort of up to down thing where there was nothing in the middle, and it was either you made all your money from your creative work, or kind of nothing. With very little between them. Yeah,
and I think that sort of speaks to kind of people's passion for almost the medium over the goals of kind of making a living from it. So because people are passionately kind of invested in cartooning and comics in ways that you don't really see in other kind of communities of practice.
I would like to know. Oh yes, go for it.
In some other research that we've been doing, we're painfully aware that that creative practice is really important and really valuable and extremely undervalued in Australia. And so people are in these positions where they have to be a barista as well as an artist. And what we found is that, and it's not going to surprise anyone here, that the people who consume creative practice are people who partake in creative practice. So often the people at the zine fairs create zines themselves, and there's a real community. And so what we're looking, when we're thinking about policy, long-term policy on a national scale, it's pretty clear that if we want to seriously drive funding, as opposed to what has happened, since the Whitlam era, where there's been pockets of funding, then funding pulled away, then a bit, and it's not really building anything sustainable like there are in other cultures, is to really from the ground level make creative practice, for in people's communities, make creative practice accessible so that people partake in it, and then that will drive demand, and then that will allow people to be able to charge more for it, earn more from it, etc. So that's work. That's kind of long-term work we're doing in the sort of arts part of the MEAA as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think you can get into a conversation with people sometimes about, and I can think of a couple where it's about professionals versus other people. There's a lot of amateurs here, and I kind of don't like being amongst all these amateurs, and I can be a snobby shithead that way myself. But if you forget that there is in fact like a community around you, and there's a reason that people start off, as young people doing X kind of work, and they grow and they change and they get better. Hopefully you divest yourself of that attitude before too long, but not always. What's MEAA kind of doing in terms of all of that? Like, what direction, I guess, is the media industry going in, do you think? Because when I observe it from the edges, it seems like, well, they would turn their whole workforce into contractors and freelancers if they could. Does that seem wrong?
I don't think it's wrong. I think that that there is some place for in-house staff, but while freelancing remains while freelancers remain sort of not organised and not unionised and without that floor of pay and conditions, it threatens everyone. It threatens the people who have jobs as well, because we're finding they're not able to as effectively bargain to improve things, and they're not just talking about pay, but a lot of people working within organizations now are really pushing for things like diversity, in their workplace and improve gender equality and things like that. So it not only is it terrible for freelancers, not only is it terrible for diversity in terms of the people who are telling stories, but it's leading to the degradation of quality as well, because people are everyone's being squashed while we're divided. So until we are able to enforce this charter that we've just launched this week and members are endorsing, I think that the industry will try to continue going that way. But once we have set up some standards, it wouldn't surprise me if people they will start seeing quality jobs in their practice again.
And it sounds like the people who do still have jobs in organizations are getting behind the charter as well.
Absolutely. So for example, at both The Guardian and Crikey, it was actually the in-house staff in their bargaining who sought minimum rates for freelancers first. And then we actually went to the freelancers and said, the staff are doing this, what do you want? So yeah, it won't work without solidarity. So it's got to be solidarity across the whole workforce, across, for everyone. Otherwise, people will just end up undercutting each other.
That sounds very encouraging.
It's exciting.
Well, I suppose, given what you've been hearing about graphic artists and the challenges they're dealing with, is there anything that we artistic freelancers can learn from maybe other freelancers who are in different areas like journalism or book editing or those sorts of things?
I think if depending on what the challenges are, I think there are already all of these communities that are set up for people who are freelancing and sharing information. So freelancers are, particularly in the media where we're sort of focusing to start with, are being incredibly open about sharing their rates and what they're being paid. And we've now got on our freelancers website, we've got a rate tracker where members can submit, I did, you know, a piece of work for this outlet and they paid me this much. And so there's transparency going on, and that's leading to a number of members going, oh, I didn't get paid that much. I'm going to go back and actually push to get the same as you. So I think basically just getting organized, you know, unionizing so that you can effectively organize and push for funding, have a voice and push for the value of your work, I think is the from what I've seen from the experiences that we've had so far is how you change things and our best hope, I think.
Yeah, well, there's a reason I joined the ACA, and there's a reason I joined MEAA, and there's even more of a reason that I wanted to have a chat with a group like this, because I wanted to have more of these organizations talking to each other. Oh no, my video's done its thing again. So, because we're getting towards the end, I guess if there's anyone in the chat there who wants to throw in a last question, we might be able to try to answer it. What do we have time for? I'm just looking back. I guess, yeah, I'm wondering from Gabe, are there any sort of pieces of data that came out of that were really surprising or interesting that maybe people weren't picking up on? Or are there any loose ends that came out of the survey that you maybe haven't had time to follow up? Like, oh, that's an interesting indication. I'd like to investigate that a bit more deeply.
Oh, I can't hear you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I pressed a button.
Okay.
Now I've pressed it again and it's gone blue, so I think we're okay. You can hear me now, right?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I think I haven't. Reflecting back, I feel like, and I think we're talking about this, David. I feel like having another pass with someone who's like an expert data scientist or that sort of thing, because the team itself, I'm from a design practice. I used to be a freelancer, but now I'm a full-time academic. My Pat's, you know, a comics graphic novelist, and then also a part-time academic, and the other two are creative writing. And so I feel like there are definitely ways to analyze the data that was provided that we're probably not really cognizant of. And so I'm keen to try and find a way to kind of dig back into the data set and see other ways that we can interpret and find that. Yeah, and it's kind of like thinking about, I saw that Tim sort of pointed out that it's sort of like telling him things that he already knows about his own practice. And I was trying to think about what's the actual purpose of a report like this. And my mind, the purpose of the report is so that in order to have government actually looking at an industry and acknowledging the industry, that it's a thing and that it needs support. The remarkable thing about the report was that the arts minister was actually holding Pat's comic, you know, and looking at this thing, and to actually get this community of practice suddenly at that point in government, and to see that they're up there, to me, that in itself is quite remarkable. But like I said, I think earlier, is that working out where money should be spent on the industry I think is really vital, and it is it so that we can support and nurture this actually really powerful and incredible community of practice, which gives so much to industry, but also so much to the world at large.
I think it's tax breaks for big American movie productions, Gabe. I think
we'll just turn the Graphic Storytellers report into we'll get Tom Hanks to direct it or something. It'll be amazing.
It could be a Joss Whedon directed Marvel movie, possibly. Dean, because people were asking it when I first sort of threw out that we were going to do this talk in the ACA public group, which I should point out, the ACA public group, anybody can join. So it's not just members of the ACA in there, it's just all sorts of people from all sorts of places. The questions that came in were very much around that kind of, how do you crack into the what's the state of comics kind of thing. So I guess maybe it would be good to just ask you, you know, for a couple of minutes, what could people try to do? Should people just, you know, go into it with an open mind and not be shitheads, or do you have any other?
Yeah, I guess I've always kind of I have a very sort of cartoony style, so there's no point in me trying to work on like a Marvel comic. So I'm always thinking about, okay, what are the publishers who publish my kind of thing? And so that would be sort of like my big advice would be to, okay, if you want to work on comics, to approach publishers who do publish the kind of work that you want to work on. Is the kind of if you want to draw comics, then you need to draw comics. Like a lot of at conventions, people come up with their portfolio and they show me a very nice drawing, and everyone draws better than me, I have to say, but it's not a comic. So you have to be able to, it's great. But comics it's storytelling. So you have to learn how to tell a story through pictures.
And by the way, when you have developed that skill, you can then use it in all these other places. So says this report. That
apparently, yeah. So also I think when approaching pictures, my thing would be to look at their submission guidelines. Please don't track down the editor and send them a DM. They're not going to like you for that. Those things are there for a reason. So.
I'm crossing that off the list.
Yeah. Were there any other specific questions that were?
I don't think we need to get more specific there. Thank you, Mal and Max and Saral, who asked some questions. But I think it was really just around, can I really make a living? Is it all gone? Is it dead? That's people can get a bit negative, and I can get a bit negative as well around, you look at other, why is that the popular work? Why isn't mine the popular work?
It's a bit, Also, can I say, I'm like, I got this like Rick and Morty cover gig, and I swear to God, it took me 3 years to get that. I would send stuff off, then 6 months later I would try again, and so so don't be afraid to, as you get better, as you practice, then to resubmit work, because you just might be caught them at a bad time and a bad day. It doesn't mean that you're a failure. The other thing is also, I think this is like, I have a 12-hour-a-week part-time job, and I always have a lot of guilt about that, because like at conventions and stuff, you talk about what you do. You don't necessarily talk about, oh yeah, I do have this part-time job, or my partner does work. That's nothing to be ashamed of. It's a tough world out there, We can't survive on single income anymore, basically, to run a household. So don't feel bad about yourself.
That's good advice. Well, we're running out of time. Does anyone want to give a last shout out or mention the project they have coming up, or maybe the union that they're part of that people could
I'll mention Folio project. People check it out. It's sort of the extension of the GSOR project. It's a sort of a three-year Australian Research Council linkage project with the National Library of Australia, Australia Council, and Craig Walker are looking at the history of Australian comics, or stories of Australian comics, we're calling it. Check out our website, which is, what are we called again? foliocomics.com. And we've got a series of essays from community members about what they think Australian comics are to them, and then what we're developing in the background is a kind of like an archive or a database of interviews and photos and objects and things related to comics in Australia. So that's the next big research project that we've got going at the moment, and we'll slowly be starting to interview people over the next year and a half, and then turning that into an archive, which then will be accessible. So, and again, it's kind of like thinking about the goal of trying to, these are all stories and practitioners that we all know because we're embedded in the community. But as someone who's worked as a producer and in other spaces, arts curators, arts producers don't necessarily know where to go or what's behind a book or things like that. So we're hoping that this can be be sort of help those sorts of build a profile for those communities of practice in towards those sort of broader audiences outside of our own audiences.
So that's at foliocomics.com.
foliocomics.com.
Yeah, cool. And I'm a little bit involved in that.
You are a bit involved, yes.
On
the panel.
Publishers should contact you to get onto your kid's book about frightening elves.
Oh, yeah.
Where do they get hold of you to do that?
So what was that mean? What are you talking about? Sorry, I was blanking. I was reading the comments. The publishers should. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. Message me through there. I'm hoping my book happens, and if it doesn't, buy my other stuff. Buy my Timmy the TikTok pony, written by Magda Szubanski. He's about a famous pony that poos. It's good stuff.
Dean Rankine book or a series of books. There's like 3 or 4.
Oh, there's 4 now. There's 4
for your child or for any immature person.
Exactly. Right.
Good night, Tim McEwen. He's got to go and buy groceries so that his patron.
Bye, Tim.
Cassie.
Well, my shout out is to join your union, and I'd say for most people it's MEAA. There's also NAVA, which is the National Association for Visual Arts. So there's a couple, but I think it's not just when you've got a boss and you want to be protected. Really, if this is the kind of thing that you think is important, if creative practice and the arts in all its forms is something you think is important, then the way we can genuinely build up our capacity to do it and share it and have a society that values it is when we do it together. So when you join MEAA, you're with 15,000 other people who live and breathe and care for this, and when we can work together, we're able to genuinely make change that sometimes, if you're feeling a bit hopeless, you're feeling a bit isolated, you can't do by yourself. So join the union.
I think that's all 100% correct, and I did join my union, and MEAA came in and saved a bunch of me and my colleagues when we were not members of the union, when something extremely unpleasant happened, thanks to the very unpleasant boss we all had. And that probably influenced me to later join my union. But I would also say join your anything or collaborate with anyone, because for all the reasons you just described, it's really easy to get lonely and isolated doing this, especially at the moment. So, yeah, collab and partner up and grow big and look large and hashtag join your union.
Absolutely.
Or the ACA. You could join the ACA. That might be an interesting.
Absolutely.
Thank you. This has been awesome. And the comments sounded like they also really enjoyed it too. So thank you to you, Gabe and Cassie and Dean, and thanks to everyone who was watching. And if someone missed this, it will still be up on the Facebook group and also on our Twitch. We'll make sure of that. And there's probably, and there's also the live stream right back here at this same Facebook group at 6:30 for the Stanley Awards, so that we can see which of the people who are still employed in the Australian media and entertainment industries get an award or several. So come on back for that. And thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, David. Thank you so much. Enjoyed it a lot. Cool.